The perfect gift turned nightmare. The sun hung high over the bustling city streets, bathing everything in a golden hue that promised warmth and optimism. Mia Collins, a spirited 17-year-old with a heart of gold, walked confidently through the crowded avenues. She clutched her purse tightly, her steps purposeful as she scanned the shops around her. Today wasn't just any day, it was her mother's birthday, and Mia was determined to find the perfect gift to show her love. Mia's relationship with her mom was special, and for as long as she could remember, her parents had always taught her the importance of showing love through actions, not just words. Her father, Marcus Collins, an accomplished FBI agent, often reminded her that small gestures could leave a lasting impact. This sentiment echoed in her mind as she paused in front of an elegant jewelry store with dazzling pieces on display. Mia pushed the glass door open, and a delicate chime announced her arrival. The air inside was cool, and the lighting made every piece of jewelry sparkle like a treasure from a fairy tale. Her wide eyes darted from case to case, soaking in the beauty of necklaces, earrings, and bracelets. A kind-looking saleswoman noticed her awe and approached with a welcoming smile. "Looking for something special?" the woman asked warmly. Mia nodded. "It's my mom's birthday, and I want to get her something she'll love, something meaningful." The saleswoman's smile deepened. "That's very thoughtful of you. Does she have a favorite style or color?" Mia bit her lip thoughtfully. "She loves necklaces, something simple but elegant, and her favorite color is blue." "I think I might have just the thing," the woman said, leading Mia to a display case filled with delicate, gemstone-adorned necklaces. Mia's heart swelled with excitement as she leaned closer to the case, her fingers hovering over a silver necklace with a small sapphire pendant. It was beautiful, simple, and exactly what she had imagined. She could already picture her mom's delighted reaction. But just as Mia was about to ask the saleswoman for the price, she felt an unease wash over her. She glanced around and noticed a tall, stern woman standing by the counter. The woman was dressed in an immaculate grey suit, her gaze fixed firmly on Mia. Her expression was cold, almost hostile, as though Mia's very presence offended her. Mia tried to ignore the uncomfortable feeling and returned her focus to the necklace. But when she glanced up again, the woman was whispering to another employee. Both of them turned their eyes toward Mia, their expressions a mix of suspicion and disapproval. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for the necklace again. She reminded herself of her dad's advice. "You belong wherever you choose to be, Mia. Don't let anyone make you feel otherwise." Taking a deep breath, she forced herself to stand tall, clutching the small sense of pride her father had instilled in her. Yet the tension in the room was suffocating. "Can I help you with something?" the saleswoman asked kindly, noticing Mia's hesitation. No," Mia replied, her voice quieter than she intended. "I'm just deciding." As Mia turned to look at another display, the whispers continued. She tried her best to stay focused, but it felt as if every move she made was being scrutinized. When she finally decided on the necklace she wanted, she noticed the suited woman nodding toward the store's security guard. Mia's chest tightened. She had done nothing wrong, but the accusatory glares made her feel guilty, like she was an intruder in a place she didn't belong. Trying to shake off the discomfort, she approached the counter to inquire about the price. Suddenly, a sharp voice interrupted her thoughts. "Excuse me, young lady." Mia turned to find herself face to face with a man in a police uniform. His expression was hard, his gaze cold and unyielding. "Step outside with me," he ordered. Her stomach dropped. "What? Why?" The officer crossed his arms, his stance intimidating. "We've received a report about suspicious behavior and a missing item. I need you to step outside while we investigate." Mia's heart raced. Suspicious behavior. I didn't take anything. But the officer wasn't listening. He gestured for her to move toward the door, and the eyes of everyone in the store followed her as she reluctantly obeyed. Out on the sidewalk, a small crowd began to gather. The officer, whose badge read D. Winston, wasted no time in accusing her. "Empty your pockets," he demanded. Mia stared at him in disbelief. "You think I stole something?" "Just do as I say," he snapped. Tears stung her eyes as she pulled out her phone, some receipts, and a few coins. "This is all I have," she said, her voice trembling. Darren Winston wasn't satisfied. "Let me see your bag," he barked. Mia hugged her bag tightly to her chest. "No, you can't do this. I didn't do anything wrong." Her voice cracked, and the humiliation of being accused in front of a growing crowd was almost too much to bear. Whispers rippled through the onlookers. "She looks guilty. Poor girl, she's terrified." "I want to call my dad," Mia said, her voice trembling but firm. Darren sneered. "You can call your dad from the station. Hand over the bag." "No," Mia shouted, her defiance surprising even herself. Just then, a commanding voice cut through the chaos. "That won't be necessary." The crowd parted, revealing a tall, imposing man with a badge clipped to his belt and fire in his eyes. Marcus Collins had arrived, a father's fury. The moment Marcus Collins stepped into the chaotic scene, the energy shifted entirely. Towering and authoritative, he commanded attention without saying a word. His tailored suit was immaculate, and the FBI badge clipped to his belt gleamed in the sunlight. His piercing gaze moved quickly from his tearful daughter to Officer Darren Winston, who had been halfway through another demand. The crowd's murmurs quieted, their focus now on the man who looked ready to unleash a storm. "Dad." Mia's voice cracked with relief, and she ran to her father, burying herself in his protective embrace. Marcus placed a steadying hand on her trembling shoulder, his jaw tightening as he looked at the man who dared to put his daughter through this. "What is going on here?" Marcus's voice was calm, but the underlying edge of fury was unmistakable. Officer Darren, though visibly startled by Marcus's imposing presence, straightened his posture and crossed his arms in defiance. "I'm Officer Darren Winston. This young woman is a suspect in a reported theft from the jewelry store. I was conducting my investigation." Marcus raised an eyebrow, his calm exterior belied by the tension in his body. "Investigation. By publicly humiliating her on the street in front of a crowd, without any evidence." "She fits the description of someone behaving suspiciously in the store," Darren retorted. Marcus tilted his head, his expression icy. "What description would that be, Officer Winston?" "A young black woman, shopping alone in a jewelry store." The crowd exchanged uneasy glances. Darren's face reddened, but he refused to back down. "That has nothing to do with it. We received a complaint, and I'm following protocol." Marcus's eyes narrowed, his voice dropping low enough to make Darren shift uncomfortably. "Protocol? Did you check the security footage? Did you find stolen property on her? Or did you assume guilt and drag her out here to make an example of her?" Darren opened his mouth to respond, but hesitated, his authority waning under Marcus's piercing glare. The badge on Marcus's belt seemed to burn brighter with every passing second, a silent reminder of who he was dealing with. "I want to speak to the store manager," Marcus said firmly, his voice carrying over the crowd. The jewelry store's manager, Mr. Peterson, appeared hesitant as he stepped out into the growing scene. His nervous expression didn't escape Marcus's notice. "I'm Marcus Collins," he introduced himself coldly, flashing his FBI credentials. "I'd like an explanation as to why my daughter was accused of theft without evidence and humiliated in front of the public." Mr. Peterson stammered, It was a misunderstanding. Mrs. Simmons, one of our regular clients, felt there was suspicious behavior and reported it to us. We simply followed up." "Suspicious behavior?" Marcus cut in, his voice sharp. "Define that for me." The manager squirmed under the intensity of Marcus's gaze. She was lingering around the displays and seemed nervous. Marcus scoffed, his tone laced with sarcasm. "Nervous. Lingering. That's the basis for this accusation. She's a 17-year-old girl trying to pick out a gift for her mother." Darren interjected, The employee said a necklace was missing after she left the store. Marcus raised his hand to silence him. Did you search her? Did you find anything stolen? No, but nothing, Marcus interrupted, his voice rising slightly. This investigation of yours reeks of profiling, incompetence, and blatant harassment. The crowd, now silent, watched with rapt attention as Marcus systematically dismantled the weak case against his daughter. Mia clung to his side, her tears drying as she watched her father stand up for her with unwavering resolve. Mr. Peterson, Marcus continued, where's the security footage? I want to see it. If there's any evidence to back up these accusations, let's see it now. The manager hesitated, glancing nervously at Darren before responding. We've been experiencing some issues with our cameras. There's a gap in the footage during the time your daughter was in the store. Marcus's eyes darkened. How convenient. No footage, no evidence, just baseless accusations. He turned back to Darren, stepping closer so that only a foot separated them. You're a disgrace to that badge, Officer Winston. My daughter was subjected to humiliation and harassment on nothing more than suspicion. I've worked in law enforcement for 20 years, and I've never seen such a blatant disregard for procedure and justice. Darren stiffened but didn't respond. Now, Marcus continued, his voice firm and authoritative, this is how it's going to go. You're going to apologize to my daughter, right here, right now. And then you're going to step aside while I conduct my own investigation into this store and your conduct. Darren clenched his jaw, his face a mix of anger and embarrassment. I acted within my rights. You acted on prejudice, Marcus snapped, his voice cutting through the air like a blade. And I will ensure that your actions are fully reviewed by your superiors. The weight of Marcus's words finally sank in. Darren hesitated for a moment before turning to Mia, his expression stiff. Miss Collins, I apologize for the misunderstanding. Mia looked up at her father, unsure how to respond. Marcus gave her shoulder a reassuring squeeze before turning back to Darren. You'll be hearing from the FBI about this. You can count on it. Darren's composure faltered, but he quickly turned and walked away, the weight of Marcus's words clearly pressing down on him. The crowd began to disperse, the tension slowly lifting as Marcus turned back to the jewelry store manager. This isn't over, Mr. Peterson, he said coldly. I'll be looking into this store's practices as well. You can expect a full investigation. Mr. Peterson nodded nervously. Of course, Agent Collins. I'm deeply sorry for the misunderstanding. Marcus didn't bother responding. He turned to Mia, his face softening as he placed a hand on her back. Let's go home, sweetheart. Mia nodded, her trust in her father unshaken. As they walked away, Marcus's mind raced with thoughts of what to do next. This wasn't just about Mia anymore. It was about every child or teenager who had ever been wrongly accused because of the color of their skin. Back at home, Marcus set Mia down on the couch and brought her a glass of water. Are you okay? He asked gently. She nodded, though her voice was still shaky. I don't understand why they treated me like that. Marcus knelt in front of her, his eyes full of love and determination. It's not about you, Mia. It's about their ignorance, their prejudice. But I promise you, this isn't the end. I'm going to make sure they answer for what they did. Mia nodded, her faith in her father renewed. Marcus stood, his expression hardening as he made his way to his office. He had a job to do, and he wasn't going to rest until the truth came to light. The search for justice. Marcus Collins spent the night poring over his notes, his laptop open on the desk in front of him. His mind was racing with a mixture of anger and determination. As an FBI agent, he had witnessed countless instances of injustice, but this was personal. His daughter had been humiliated, accused, and profiled in broad daylight, and he was determined to ensure it never happened again, not to Mia and not to anyone else. He tapped into his professional connections, sending out a few emails to colleagues in the local law enforcement network. He was careful with his language, framing his inquiry as an informal follow-up to a potential misuse of police authority. Marcus knew the importance of treading carefully. He didn't want Darren Winston or the jewelry store to get wind of his deeper investigation just yet. After a few hours, Marcus received his first reply. It was from a friend in the city's precinct, someone he had worked with on a joint task force years ago. The message was short but revealing. Winston's been under scrutiny before. Multiple complaints about excessive force and racial bias, but nothing ever sticks. Might be worth looking into his disciplinary records. Marcus leaned back in his chair, his jaw tightening. Complaints and no action, exactly the kind of systemic failure he loathed. Darren Winston was not just a bad cop, he was a symptom of a larger problem. Marcus decided to dig deeper. He accessed public records databases and cross-referenced them with his FBI resources, searching for anything he could find on Winston and his previous conduct. What he uncovered was troubling. Over the past 5 years, Winston had been involved in at least 8 incidents where his behavior was called into question. The details were vague. Use of unnecessary force, unsubstantiated accusations, and failure to follow protocol were recurring themes. Yet, each case had been dismissed or closed without further action. It was a pattern that spoke volumes about the system protecting him. But Marcus didn't stop there. His next target was the jewelry store. He pulled up their business records, scouring for anything unusual. He found that the store, owned by a corporate entity, had been the subject of several complaints filed with the Better Business Bureau. The complaints were eerily similar: accusations of racial profiling, poor treatment of minority customers, and refusal to provide evidence when accusations of theft were challenged. Marcus's jaw clenched tighter with each line he read. One name appeared repeatedly in the complaints: Mrs. Evelyn Simmons. Marcus recognized the name immediately. She was the well-dressed woman who had been staring at Mia in the store, the one who had allegedly reported her suspicious behavior. A quick search revealed that Evelyn Simmons was the wife of Judge Robert Simmons, a prominent figure in the city. The Simmons family was wealthy, influential, and well-connected, exactly the type of people who thought they were untouchable. Marcus took a deep breath, forcing himself to focus. He wasn't intimidated by power or influence. His entire career had been built on holding those in authority accountable. But this case wasn't just about exposing Mrs. Simmons or Darren Winston. It was about dismantling the system that allowed people like them to thrive. The next morning, Marcus sat down with Mia over breakfast. Her eyes were still puffy from the events of the previous day, but she seemed calmer, more composed. Marcus placed a gentle hand on hers. "I've been looking into this, sweetheart," he said softly. "I'm going to make sure they answer for what they did to you." Mia nodded, her voice quiet. "Thanks, Dad. I don't understand why they thought I was guilty. I didn't do anything wrong." "You didn't," Marcus reassured her. "This isn't about what you did or didn't do. It's about their prejudice, their assumptions. But we're going to prove the truth, and we're going to hold them accountable." Mia's lips curled into a small, grateful smile. "I believe you, Dad." After breakfast, Marcus got to work. His first stop was the jewelry store. He had already scheduled a meeting with Mr. Peterson, the store manager, and he wasn't planning to leave until he got answers. When he arrived, the store was quiet, its usual elegance marred by the tension of the previous day's events. Mr. Peterson greeted him nervously, his hands ringing as he led Marcus into the back office. "I want to be transparent with you, Agent Collins," Peterson began, his voice trembling slightly. "We've never had an incident escalate like this before." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Really? Because I found multiple complaints about this store, all with strikingly similar details. Care to explain?" Peterson's face paled. Those were misunderstandings." "Misunderstandings?" Marcus's voice was calm but carried an undeniable edge. "Or a pattern of targeting minority customers. I've reviewed your complaints, Mr. Peterson. They paint a very clear picture." Peterson shifted uncomfortably. I I don't make those decisions. Mrs. Simmons is a regular customer, and she's very particular. When she raises concerns, we're obligated to take them seriously." "Mrs. Simmons," Marcus repeated, his tone cold. "A wealthy woman with no authority over your store dictates your policies. That's interesting." Peterson stammered, "She's well connected. Her husband is a judge. It's complicated." Marcus leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "Let me make something clear, Mr. Peterson. I don't care how complicated this is. My daughter was humiliated because of your store's negligence and Mrs. Simmons's baseless accusations. Now, I want to see the security footage from yesterday, or I'll be filing a formal complaint with the Department of Justice." Peterson hesitated for a moment before reluctantly pulling up the footage on a monitor. As he scrolled through the video, Marcus watched intently. The footage showed Mia browsing the store, her movements calm and deliberate. She didn't pocket anything, didn't act suspiciously in any way. But what caught Marcus' attention was Mrs. Simmons. The video showed her gesturing toward Mia and speaking to an employee. Moments later, the employee whispered to Darren Winston, who entered the store and approached Mia. "That's it?" Marcus asked, his voice tight. "She pointed at my daughter, and you assumed she was guilty." Peterson swallowed hard. It looks bad, I admit." "It's worse than bad," Marcus said sharply. "It's unlawful, and I'm going to make sure everyone involved answers for it." Marcus left the store with copies of the footage and a renewed sense of purpose. His next stop was the precinct. It was time to confront Darren Winston and his superiors. Confronting the system. Marcus Collins's footsteps echoed against the polished floors of the city police precinct. His expression was set, his demeanor unyielding. He wasn't just here as a father fighting for justice. He was here as an FBI agent determined to dismantle the rot within a system he had spent his life serving. Today, he would confront not just Darren Winston, but the culture that allowed officers like him to act with impunity. As Marcus approached the front desk, a young officer sitting behind a computer looked up nervously. Marcus's badge, clipped to his belt, was impossible to miss. "I need to speak with Officer Darren Winston," Marcus said, his voice calm but firm. "And I want his commanding officer in the room as well." The young officer hesitated. "Do you have an appointment, sir?" Marcus's eyes narrowed slightly. "No, but I have a federal badge and evidence of misconduct. Do you want to be the one to explain why I was turned away?" The officer blanched and quickly picked up the phone. A few murmured words later, he nodded and gestured toward a small conference room. "Please wait in there, sir. I'll get them." Marcus stepped into the room and closed the door behind him. The space was small and nondescript, with a plain table and a few mismatched chairs. He placed a flash drive containing the jewelry store's security footage on the table, along with a folder containing Darren Winston's disciplinary record, which he had obtained earlier. It wasn't long before the door opened, and Officer Darren Winston entered, followed by a middle-aged man in a captain's uniform. The captain introduced himself as Captain Greg Harris, extending a hand that Marcus shook briefly. "Agent Collins," Captain Harris began, his tone professional but cautious, "I understand you have some concerns about an incident involving your daughter." "Concerns is putting it lightly," Marcus replied, sitting down and gesturing for them to do the same. Darren Winston sat stiffly, his jaw tight, while Captain Harris maintained a neutral expression. Marcus leaned forward, his hands resting on the table. "Yesterday, Officer Winston humiliated and falsely accused my 17-year-old daughter of theft without any evidence. She was publicly searched, her reputation tarnished, and her rights violated. I'm here to make sure this doesn't happen again." Darren opened his mouth to respond, but Marcus raised a hand, cutting him off. "I'm not finished." He slid the folder across the table toward Captain Harris. "These are complaints filed against Officer Winston over the past 5 years. 8 incidents involving racial bias, excessive force, and failure to follow protocol. 8 incidents, Captain, and yet he's still wearing a badge. Explain that to me." Harris' jaw tightened as he flipped through the folder. Agent Collins, I understand your frustration, but these cases were reviewed and closed. No formal disciplinary action was deemed necessary. No action was deemed necessary, Marcus repeated, his voice dripping with disbelief. Let me guess, because the victims were young black men and women with little power or resources to fight back. Harris stiffened. That's a serious accusation. It's not an accusation, it's a fact, Marcus said coldly. And now we have my daughter, Mia Collins, a straight-A student with no criminal record. She was in a jewelry store buying a gift for her mother. There's security footage showing she didn't take a single thing. And yet, your officer dragged her out, treated her like a criminal, and traumatized her in front of a crowd. He slid the flash drive across the table. Here's the footage. Watch it. Harris inserted the flash drive into his laptop, and the room fell silent as the video played. It was clear. Mia's behavior was calm, focused, and entirely innocent. The tension in the room grew palpable as the video showed Mrs. Simmons pointing Mia out to an employee, followed by Darren's arrival and his subsequent actions. When the footage ended, Marcus crossed his arms. Tell me, Captain, how does this justify Officer Winston's behavior? Harris exhaled deeply, looking between Marcus and Darren. The footage does raise some concerns, he admitted. Concerns? Marcus repeated, his voice rising slightly. This isn't about concerns. It's about systemic racial profiling and abuse of authority. Your officer acted on the word of a prejudiced woman with no evidence, and now my daughter is paying the price for his incompetence. Darren finally spoke, his tone defensive. I was just doing my job. I acted on a credible report of theft. Credible? Marcus interrupted sharply. What part of that woman's baseless accusation was credible? Did you check the cameras before acting? Did you even stop to question her motive? Or did you just see a young black girl and decide she fit your profile? Darren flushed, his composure cracking. I made a mistake. A mistake? Marcus leaned forward, his voice low and dangerous. A mistake is forgetting to turn off your coffee pot. What you did wasn't a mistake. It was negligence and prejudice. And if you think I'm letting this go, you're sorely mistaken. Captain Harris raised a hand, his expression stern. Agent Collins, I understand your anger, and I agree this situation was mishandled. Officer Winston, you'll need to submit a full report on this incident. We'll conduct an internal review. Marcus shook his head, a bitter smile tugging at his lips. An internal review. That's the problem with this system, Captain. It policies itself and lets officers like Winston walk away with nothing but a slap on the wrist. Not this time. Harris frowned. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting an external investigation, Marcus said firmly. I've already contacted the Civil Rights Division at the Department of Justice. They'll be reviewing not just this incident, but every complaint against Officer Winston and the precinct's handling of those cases. I'm also filing a formal complaint with the city's Civilian Oversight Board. This stops now. The room fell silent, the weight of Marcus's words sinking in. Darren looked visibly shaken, while Harris nodded slowly, realizing the gravity of the situation. Understood, Harris said finally. I'll cooperate fully with any external investigation, and I'll personally ensure Officer Winston is placed on administrative leave pending the outcome. That's a start, Marcus said, standing. He turned to Darren, his gaze cold. I'd suggest you start looking for a new career, Officer Winston, because I'm going to make sure you're held accountable for every life you've damaged. Darren said nothing, his face pale. As Marcus left the precinct, he felt a sense of grim satisfaction. This was just the beginning. He knew there would be pushback, but the system wouldn't change overnight. But he was ready for the fight. He wasn't just fighting for Mia. He was fighting for every innocent person who had ever been treated as guilty simply because of the color of their skin. The reckoning. The following weeks were a whirlwind of action, investigation, and revelations. Marcus Collins had turned his anger into a relentless pursuit of justice, and his efforts were beginning to yield results. What started as a father's fight for his daughter's dignity had grown into a battle against systemic injustice, a battle Marcus was determined to win, not just for Mia, but for everyone who had suffered at the hands of racial profiling and abuse of power. The community speaks out. News of Mia's ordeal spread quickly, thanks to a carefully crafted press release issued by Marcus's lawyer. The statement outlined the incident at the jewelry store, Darren Winston's history of complaints, and Marcus's decision to involve the Department of Justice. Within days, the story became a focal point of local news, sparking outrage and drawing attention to long-standing issues of racial bias in law enforcement. Community leaders, civil rights organizations, and concerned citizens began to rally behind Marcus and Mia. Protesters gathered outside the precinct and the jewelry store, holding signs that read "Justice for Mia" and "Stop Racial Profiling." The protests were peaceful but powerful, a testament to the community's unity and determination. Marcus attended several of the rallies, speaking directly to the crowds. Standing on a makeshift stage with Mia by his side, he addressed the gathering storm of anger and hope. "This isn't just about my daughter," Marcus said, his voice steady and resolute. "This is about every person who has ever been judged not by their actions, but by the color of their skin. This is about dismantling a system that allows prejudice to thrive, and we won't stop until we see real change." Mia stood silently beside her father, her hand gripping his tightly. She was overwhelmed by the outpouring of support, but still processing the trauma of what had happened. Yet, as she looked out at the sea of faces, young and old, black and white, all united in their demand for justice, she felt a flicker of hope. The evidence unveiled. Meanwhile, Marcus's investigation continued. With the support of his colleagues in the FBI and the Civil Rights Division, he uncovered a web of misconduct that extended far beyond Darren Winston. The jewelry store's history of racial profiling turned out to be just the tip of the iceberg. Records revealed that the store had a pattern of falsely accusing minority customers of theft. In many cases, no evidence was ever found, but the accusations were enough to cause humiliation and distress. Marcus's team also discovered internal emails from the store's management, instructing employees to keep an eye on certain customers based solely on their appearance. Then there was Evelyn Simmons. Further digging revealed that she had been involved in multiple incidents of false accusations, almost always targeting young black customers. Her influence as the wife of a prominent judge had shielded her from scrutiny, until now. Marcus's findings were turned over to the Department of Justice, which began building a case against the jewelry store and Mrs. Simmons. But the most damning evidence came from Officer Darren Winston's own actions. A whistleblower within the precinct provided Marcus with internal memos and recordings that painted a damning picture of Winston's behavior. In one recording, Winston could be heard making derogatory remarks about minority suspects, joking about how easy it was to pin crimes on them because nobody asks questions. The whistleblower's testimony, combined with the mounting evidence, was enough to trigger an official investigation into the precinct. Darren Winston was placed on unpaid leave, and the captain, Greg Harris, faced mounting pressure to step down for his failure to address the complaints against Winston. A legal battle begins. Marcus's lawyer filed a civil lawsuit against the jewelry store, its corporate parent, and Evelyn Simmons for defamation, emotional distress, and racial discrimination. The case drew national attention, with legal experts weighing in on its significance. "This case has the potential to set a precedent," one expert said during a televised debate. "If Marcus Collins succeeds, it could open the door for more victims of racial profiling to seek justice." The legal team built their case meticulously, using the security footage, the complaints against the store, and Mrs. Simmons's history as evidence. Evelyn Simmons, who had previously been untouchable due to her husband's influence, was now facing public scrutiny and legal consequences. The judge presiding over the case rejected attempts to dismiss the lawsuit, stating that the evidence presented by Marcus's team was compelling. The Civil Rights Division also announced a federal investigation into the precinct, focusing on Darren Winston and the systemic failures that allowed his behavior to go unchecked. Marcus's fight had grown into a national movement, inspiring others to come forward with their own stories of injustice. Mia finds her voice. While Marcus led the legal and investigative efforts, Mia found herself becoming a symbol of resilience and hope. At first, she was hesitant to speak publicly about her experience, but with her father's encouragement, she began to share her story at community events and rallies. "I was just a girl shopping for a gift for my mom," Mia said during one speech, her voice trembling but determined. "I didn't do anything wrong, but I was treated like a criminal. That's not okay. Nobody should ever feel afraid or ashamed because of who they are." Her words resonated deeply, especially with young people who had faced similar experiences. Mia's courage inspired others to speak out, and her story became a rallying cry for change. The day of reckoning. Months later, the lawsuits and investigations culminated in a landmark day. The jewelry store settled the lawsuit for a significant sum, which Marcus donated to organizations fighting racial injustice. Evelyn Simmons faced public disgrace, and her husband's influence was no longer enough to shield her. She issued a public apology, though it was clear her words were driven by pressure rather than genuine remorse. As for Darren Winston, the federal investigation led to his dismissal from the force and the revocation of his law enforcement credentials. The whistleblower's testimony was key in exposing a culture of bias within the precinct, prompting sweeping reforms. The victory was bittersweet. Marcus knew that systemic change wouldn't happen overnight, but this was a step in the right direction. He had fought not just for Mia, but for every person who had been wronged by a broken system. A new beginning. On the anniversary of the incident, Marcus and Mia stood together at a community event celebrating progress and resilience. The crowd cheered as Marcus took a microphone. "This journey has been hard, but it's shown me the power of truth, justice, and community," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "We still have work to do, but together, we can create a world where our children don't have to live in fear of prejudice. Thank you for standing with us." Mia stepped forward, her voice steady and confident. "What happened to me was wrong, but it doesn't define me. It made me stronger. And it showed me that when we stand together, we can make a difference." The crowd erupted in applause, their hope rekindled. Marcus looked at his daughter with pride, knowing that this was only the beginning of her journey and their fight for justice.